Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I'm Karen Lemmy, curator of sculpture here. Can you all hear me? Great. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Deborah Butterfield, our speaker for tonight's Clarice Smith Distinguished Lecture in American Art. Before we begin our program, please silence your cell phones and other electronic pets. We're recording this event and sharing video on the museum's website in case you wish to hear it again or share it with friends who could not join us. Deborah Butterfield has agreed to answer a few questions afterwards, so please present your questions at either of the two microphones positioned midway in both aisles, as we'd like for our online audiences to hear our conversation as well. At the conclusion of the program, I hope you will all join us for a brief reception upstairs in Kogod Courtyard. The Smithsonian American Art Museum established the Clarice Smith Distinguished Lectures in American Art in 2004 to present new insights from the perspectives of the finest artists, critics, and scholars. This annual series is made possible by the generosity of Clarice Smith, who is with us tonight. Thank you, Clarice. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our director, Betsy Brune, for her leadership in developing this incredible series over the last 13 years. Now on to our guest speaker, Deborah Butterfield, who was born in San Diego, as it's well known, on the 75th running of the Kentucky Derby. An auspicious start, as horses are so central to her work. She attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine and earned a BA and MFA from University of California, Davis, a place renowned for its art department, which included Butterfield's teachers, Wayne Thiebaud, William Wiley, Manuel Neri, all of whom, I'm proud to say, are represented in our museum collection. Butterfield's work has been the subject of several major museum exhibitions, including those at the Denver Art Museum and the Seattle Art Museum, and her work may be found in permanent collections too numerous to mention, as well as many public sites such as airports and university campuses. She divides her time between studios in Hawaii, Montana, and the Walla Walla Foundry in Washington State, which we've learned at lunchtime was a veritable hotbed for contemporary artists today. Sculpted horses run wild through the history of art, from the life-size renderings buried alongside Chinese terracotta warriors in 200 BC to Marcus Aurelius's monument presiding over ancient Rome, countless equestrian sculptures of the Renaissance, and of course, American art's own Frederick Remington, or for that matter, the many monuments in Washington. Butterfield's horses are altogether different from those war horses saddled by military generals and the weight of history, although at times her horses also refer to specific world events. For example, those she made early on in her career as a quiet form of protest during the Vietnam War. And most recently, Three Sorrows, made in part from the flotsam jetsam retrieved after the triple tragedy, earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster that shook Japan in 2011. Butterfield portrays this powerful and alluring creature on its own terms, embodying the spirit of the animal on which human civilization has heavily depended for so long. But each one of her horses also moves beyond, or perhaps I should say through, its subject to offer an array of contrasts. The overall form, unmistakably recognizable as a horse, is also an extraordinary study in abstraction. Each one conveys a sense of gesture and motion, as well as quietude and stillness. Each one carries the solidity and mass of its subject, while simultaneously drawing our attention to its negative spaces within. Deborah Butterfield's sculpture in our collection intertwines references to Hawaii, Montana, and Washington State, and invites one to shut out for a moment the battle cries of our modern life and to contemplate in quietude the power of art as a universal means of communication. I invite you to all see it on the third floor sometime. I'd like to welcome Deborah Butterfield. Thank you. Wonderful. Let's adjust the microphone.
Can you hear me with this lavalier? Yes. Wow, that was really good. I think you should just keep talking. Thank you. That was really lovely. Oh, thank you guys for coming tonight. I wanted to read a couple of things before I start. I'll give you a good picture. There we go. This was in the day of film, and we didn't know that he had stuck his tongue out for this picture, so we got it developed. So he was very excited. That's Willie. William Wiley, one of my teachers and dear friend, and someone whom I admire so much, wrote a poem for a catalog of mine many, many years ago. And I'd like to read it. It's called Our Equestrian. Who has not loved horses? Who has not been terrified by horses? Who has not been drawn by horses? Who has not been ridden, petted, been thrown by horses? Never? Not even in dreams? Not ever way back, almost before you remember? You never took a pencil or wrote a stick and imagined? You never, being so small, were ever swung up faster than an elevator leaves your stomach to find yourself sitting on the living, warm, powerful fur, skin, bones, and mind, finally ready to go anywhere. You never ached or cried over Black Beauty, the finish line, Man o' War, Flicka? I don't believe it. You're lying. Look at Debbie's horses. You'll remember. P.S. These are not horses. And then Wittgenstein said, I sit astride life like a bad rider on a horse. I only owe it to the horse's good nature that I am not thrown off at this very moment. All right, can we turn the lights down a bit? Oh, I don't know if it will. All right, well, most of my speech has been said, really. I was born on the day that Ponder won, and he was sired by Pensive, so I thought it was very appropriate. And there's a few seats in the middle right here, guys. So I went to UC Davis in 1970 wanting to do ceramics with Bob Arneson. And when I got there, he said that we don't do pots in the university. We only do sculpture. If you want to make pots, you have to do that at night on your own time. And so I did. And of course, that's all he ended up critiquing was my pots. Bob just didn't like bad pots. And I ended up becoming his TA and adored and admired him as well. So my first few slides are of pieces. They're life-size ceramic saddles that I made in graduate school. And it was before I fessed up to being a horse lover. I'd been teased a lot by drawing horses and loving horses in school. And so I was trying to go straight, you know. But I ended up living for free on a thoroughbred farm for feeding the horses in the morning. And so I got to ride them, and I was really fascinated by how these useful objects looked when they weren't being used, and also drawn to the patterning of the carving in the leather and how much it reminded me of Chinese ceramics and how you carve clay when it's leather hard. So this was the first piece. I had to build a ceramic horseback and fire it, and it's in three parts, the stirrups, the leggings, and then the saddle itself. It was quite a complicated task for ceramics. And this is a piece that really led to, I think, my reclining horses. But it was also a joke. There were I got so much teasing about making saddles. They were so sexual, and according to my teasers. And so this was just to tease back. And the idea of drapery in classic sculpture, how it reveals the form by concealing it. But it also was, again, this idea of an object asleep, not doing its job. I had always wanted to be a Chinese potter from another dynasty, and not being able to pull that off, I couldn't make fake Chinese pots, so I started to make saddles, my own format, using the surfaces of the Chinese pots. So this is a Ming Dynasty pot, and this is my saddle after the Ming Dynasty. That's actually at the San Francisco Museum of Art. I don't know if they'll ever show it, but the problem with it is that then I had to make a Ming Dynasty sawhorse for it, and it was really hard for me. I am not good with table saws or measuring things. So steel and clay are much more forgiving. So this started to worry me. Then this second piece was after the Sung Dynasty, Northern Sung 11th Dynasty, 11th century. Oh, I'm sorry. And it's white clay with black slip on it, and everywhere where the white is, it's been incised away. And when I fired it, it cracked, and I was heartbroken. But then I remembered that they would fill the pots, the cracks, with gold to fix it, but also to kind of liken it to a wise old person. That many things have happened, there are scars and wrinkles along the way, but they're filled with gold because they result in wisdom. And so when I did that, the piece just sang, and it was acquired by a collector of Chinese ceramics. But again, I couldn't put it on just any old sawhorse, and so the dilemma was really bad. Here, this is the first saddle, actually. My first horse was a racehorse, retired racehorse mare, and she tried to buck me off in a cactus patch once. So that inspired this. And Arneson said to me, "Have you ever heard of Lucas Samaras?" And he did these chairs and things with pins that were very, very prickly. And so that's how I found out about Lucas, who I also deeply admire. But this one, I use porcelain stickers and put them into the holes in the low-fire ceramic saddle with silicone so that I could replace them, but also when you'd brush against them, they'd give a little bit. And like anything that prickly, it was very, very fragile. And then I got a scholarship to Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and there was no kilns there, which I was really thrilled about. Greg, can he sit there? You can't see from over here. I know, he's special. I have a show up in Seattle at Greg Kucera Gallery. That's why. Anyway, so I went to Skowhegan knowing that I wouldn't be able to do ceramics anymore, and frankly, I was really exhausted from the kiln god necessities and all of the processes in the many times you fire clay. And so I went there. John had been there, John Buck, my husband, had been there the year before and told me, there's hardwood forests back there that we don't have out in the West, and over winter, they acquired this fabric-like quality so that they maintained their integrity but were soft and flexible. And he was just so amazed by them. And when I went, Wiley was, I had him as an undergraduate too, and I couldn't understand how you begin to find your imagery as an artist. And I loved puns. I was an English minor in San Diego State before I transferred up to Davis. And everybody hated puns down there. And when I got there, Wiley, like he would have this little watercolor, and then 3/4 of the page was filled with a title, which was a story which is full of puns, and I couldn't believe my good fortune. But he'd say, well, just think of a title and then illustrate it. So I went to Skowhegan knowing at least that the first thing I was going to do would be a bed of leaves. And so this was my first real sculpture. And it didn't have to have a base, no sawhorse, no table saws. I tied all of the branches together and made a quilt out of these leaves. And the idea of beds, I left it as an open metaphor for people because, you know, you make love on them, you die on them, you jump up and down on them, you hide underneath them. And I just wanted it to be in the woods, there for people to bring their own memories to. But the faculty there was, they wouldn't critique it because it wasn't made out of art supplies. So, so this one was definitely made out of art supplies. So it got an award for sculpture there. But I welded steel, which I had bluffed my way into a welded steel sculpture class as a freshman at San Diego State, and it was the most important class I have ever taken. It was just fantastic. And so I was able to build, if you can weld, you can build almost anything you want. So it's covered with chicken wire and then burlap and plaster. And in Skowhegan, we just had these little, the sculpture studios were just little sheds outside, and which is now what I have in Hawaii, or I did have. It really, for me, my life, I didn't want it to be gray. I wanted to be in nature but still working. And so this was just, it really made me come alive as an artist. There was a herd of little dairy heifers next to us that I visited with. And so I did a self-portrait of myself, wary and unbalanced, losing my footing in love and all of that stuff that makes you want to lose your balance. So this was my first self-portrait. And then I went to London or England with John Buck, and I had been an exchange student of Finland and really was into reindeer and caribou imagery. And so this was, I built in England. I cried a lot, a California girl in England. It was pretty, it was rough. I'd never been used to the class system either. You know, and growing up in California, if you couldn't outrun somebody, you either didn't train hard enough or you just couldn't outrun them. You know, we just had equal opportunity in many ways then. So anyway, it was very hard for me to be there, but this was, it was like a piece of the sky, how you apprehend forms in nature, how we personify forms, which is kind of how a horse sees too. Anyway, it's a fountain, so the garden hose is going up its left hind leg, and then it's I'd seen a picture of a pitcher in a museum, a drawing of it, and it was like a colander, and you'd use it to water seedlings. And having been a potter, I thought it was so beautiful. It was a thrown pitcher, and you just dip it, and the water would spurt out like this. So this was like my vessel was sort of leaking. And then, as Karen mentioned, I wanted to do real self-portraits, but Manuel Neri made such beautiful female figures. I thought, why bother, honestly? I was perfectly satisfied with his work. And so I decided the real self-portrait for me would be to be a horse. And most of the sculpture that I'd seen of horses were equestrian with generals, and usually stallions, you know, the embodiment of the war machine. Whoever had horses really conquered those who didn't, and they were the same as tanks and MiG jets. And yet I looked at the Chinese, and there was at least a portion in their history where the horses were used. This one is for sport. She's playing polo. But they were also used as figures to get you from this world to the next, as tomb figures. And I've always thought of the horse as a spiritual, the carrier of spiritual matters, and to help you get to some destination, literally and figuratively. I had to buy a horse that looked like this so that I could make tong horses. You'll meet him in a bit. So then my graduate show at UC Davis in '73 were these big plaster horses, and then the show, I actually made the one on the right for the Berkeley Art Museum in '74. I guess I can walk over here. So this mare was my real mare that I bought with money from a car wreck that I'd been in. And she really was me. The point of her butt to the point of her shoulder, we were the same. Her head was this long, her hoof to her fetlock was this long, her cannon bone was this long. And so I made the piece, I welded the armature right next to her paddock, but around the corner so she wouldn't get flash from the arc welder. And instead of using a tape measure to measure things, I would just hold the rebar up to my own body, and I knew how big it had to be. And so it was like the Vitruvian man, the Da Vinci man, this idea of this proportion and the golden mean, the golden rectangle. And that rectangle of the horse's body is really what I have used as my canvas for 40 years now. They're plaster, they weigh about 800 pounds. I wanted them to look as if they were a Turner painting, and that, like Doubting Thomas, you could just stick your hand in them, and that they were really kind of an ethereal mist or piece of the sky. The caribou, the reindeer, kind of presaged this. And then in 74 to 76, I was at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and got offered a show at the Madison Art Center. And I had just visited Secretariat, and he was the most valuable horse in the world and completely covered in mud. And, I was so disappointed at first. But then I thought, oh my God, he looks like a New Guinea mud man. And it was just so fabulous. He really looked like how wonderful a clay pot looks before it's fired. I always felt that firing it just reduced it in volume and scale. And so I made a mixture of mud and plaster and dextrin, which is a glue that's like on the back of stamps, that's a sugar starch, and that is you can wet it down and it will activate again. Anyway, so I dug up dirt which had earthworms, rabbit shit, pine needles, all kinds of things in it, and smeared it over these paper mache horses that I'd made. Still the steel armature with chicken wire, only John had told me about this paper that they use for taxidermy forms. So these I had in my studio, and I didn't need 5 guys to help me move it. I could turn them upside down myself and work on the belly and move them around and look at them in different arrangements. It was so liberating for me. A crane does the same thing now for me, but it was wonderful. Anyway, the gallery space had been lit for a print show, and when I moved them in there, I realized that I wanted them there almost more like dancers or participants in an event, a performance. So we didn't light the work at all, we just left the walls lit. And it was about 30 by 36, and many people wouldn't walk into the room because you had to sidle through it. And though they didn't have mouths or teeth, people were very worried about it. And the dynamic tension was really great. And I got my first review in Art Forum, and the first sentence was, "Deborah Butterfield's horses have no genitals." So I couldn't even show it to my parents, It was like, oh, they didn't have eyes or nostrils or mouths either. So it was really... Well, and then the show went to Zola Lieberman Gallery in Chicago. And then this piece came for my next show there. I had moved to Montana. John was teaching at Montana State. I took a leave of absence from Madison. And I thought, the big horses got a really good response. Is it only because they're big? So I tried to make a small piece and see if it still had the power. And I lived next to a lodgepole forest, and we were out hiking with our chow chow. And I looked at him in the woods, saw him a ways away, and thought it was a chow at 50 yards was a grizzly bear at 300 yards, and saw this, and like a horse, spooked. But also saw this kind of syncopation of like running a stick along a picket fence. So I made this piece that was, it had many legs. I thought of the nude descending the stairs, that idea of suggesting motion, but also suggesting the forest and the environment that it was from. And then for my show at Zola Lieberman in '77, I built these works. I was very wounded by that review, and which otherwise wasn't really bad. It was just so weird. And so these things have, protrusions, things sticking out everywhere. There's even a little deer antler on this one's thigh, so they were very horny, as we might say. But more than that, I thought of okay, this is me. I had a horse at home really living with us in Montana, and I would run out because he'd be flapped out in the snow and the sun, and I thought he was dead because the ribs get so displaced. And I'd go, and he'd be just like, what's your problem? I'm just sunbathing. And so I was fascinated by how their form gets changed when they're lying down. It's like life drawing with Wayne Thiebaud. He'd have you come in and he'd give you 10 minutes and say, draw the naked lady up in the corner. So we drew the naked lady. Then he'd make us make a grid and make dots, with your pencil and place the object on the grid. Finally, he let us connect the dots, and it was a reclining nude that looked like a landscape or a mountain range. And you realize that when you think naked lady, you draw what you think, not what you see. And so this is sort of where I began to think about making the horse that was not a symbol, like a sign on the road horse. I wanted to have it be something that made you think and feel more than that. But so I thought of being a nude model, Courbet, Matisse, Monet, all of these beautiful reclining nudes. And so I thought, well, I'll have the horses, they'll be the naked ladies reclining in the gallery. But then the thing about a horse is that they're a prey animal, and so they're built to sleep standing up in case a predator is lurking around. But when they sleep lying down, it's because they feel confident. So for me, I thought it's a very feminist statement to say, all right, the wolf predator critics are slouching around, but I am brave, and I'm just going to take a rest here in this gallery because I'll let myself be vulnerable because I'm powerful. And so that was the statement. But then also, it was a pun about the figure-ground relationship, that the horse really was made of the ground. This is, again, steel with a chicken wire armature, and then mud with ground paper and dextrin and grass hay. So it's about an inch thick. So it's hollow, so we could lift it up and carry it. And so for me, it really became the metaphor for the horse representing the earth, or being the earth. Vera List had this horse for years, and they went to good places. They went to the Whitney and the DeRosa, or no, there's another one. They went all kinds of places. It was shocking. Actually, I didn't sell this work in Chicago, and I was very depressed. And Roberta Lieberman took the slides to Ivan Karp at OK Harris Gallery, and because he would look at people's work, and he said, "This is marvelous. We'll put it in a group show in the fall." and I think this is maybe February. And then he called me in April and said, "Young lady, how would you feel about having a one-person show next month in New York?" And I'm like, I could adjust. And because I hadn't sold it, it was in a warehouse, and they were able to ship it, and I had a show there. I had, I don't know, 4 shows with him, I think. It was amazing. So sometimes the thing that you think is the worst thing ends up being a great thing. This piece was one of the not great things. It was about my father's death. And I got to be in a show at the Albright Knox Museum in Buffalo, and they could afford to ship the work, but not me. So I made a piece that I sent them a compass and said, put them north, south, east, and west, and put their noses 3 feet apart. And it was, for me, 2 different experiences. I looked at a book on Navajo sand paintings at the Art Institute in Chicago, and it showed a little girl sitting in the middle of this painting with the 4 directions of the universe being healed. And I thought, oh, I want that. And then one of my first sculptures in Madison was from the Circus World Museum of a Percheron baggage horse. They wanted to commemorate the horses that did all the work, putting up the tents and hauling the wagons and things. And so my field research was to go in a pasture with 8 Percherons. And I would go out there, and their heads were this big. They were giants. And they would all come around me and nuzzle me. And I would do that thing that they do in encounter groups. I would just fall backwards. And they would catch me with their noses and push me up. And it was just, I thought, so I needed to do this. But the winter that this happened was the coldest winter we'd ever had. So I had to go to the nursery, and they had a pile of dirt, and use a pickaxe because it was just frozen solid. And then the sticks, I skied down our hill and broke off branches, and then took my horse and drug them out to the road, and then got the chains on the truck. It was like, I'm like, why can't I just order this from an art supply catalog? But because it was, about my dad, it became clear that it was about suffering. And then this piece came echoing back to the piece with the mini legs, and again the lodgepole forest. And I went to get these lodgepole pieces and got attacked by ground hornets. I got 56 stings. There's a lot of things connected with making this stuff. People say, how long does it take you to make this? Well, it doesn't take me very long to make stuff, but getting ready to make stuff takes a long time. Anyway, this one was, the other pieces, I wanted them to look like I'd maybe bulldozed a flooded creek that had overflowed and made this shape that ambiguously became a horse. But in this one, by placing the sticks on it, it was a very human thing, and I was thinking of architecture, or possibly animal architecture, but in this case, very much a teepee, and also looking like the rays of light coming, that this horse is basking. Or it could be a bonfire. There she is. I was very inspired by Magritte. And this was at Hanson Fuller Gallery in San Francisco, and we had to bring everything in with a crane, and Diana Fuller was having kind of trying to keep it together, but you can see there's that's the horse, but the whole gallery was just solid sawdust and tree branches, and so it was a little disturbing. And then I had another show in New York at OK Harris, and we had moved to we finally bought our own little farm, and it had 3 rows of fencing, one next to the other, that had never been torn down. And so I made 29 trips to the dump. And as I was doing it, I realized, gosh, I'm buying chicken wire and rebar. I could be using some of this old metal to make armatures. And so I just started playing with the material, sticking all the broken stuff through it, and then threw mud on it. And I love the piece, but then I realized, this is this thing. I'm the woman who does mud horses and realized that it was frosting on a cake that probably didn't need frosting. And this is another piece from this mission of all this old hardwire fencing. It's this woven square wiring. And when you roll it up, it's very springy, and it will explode and cut you, poke your eye out. And so the prudent thing to do is to stick a stick through it to keep it from unraveling. So this horse is just completely held together like this with these sticks. And they say that a horse can return to the wild in 3 weeks. And so I think that someday these sticks will all rot and the wire will explode out of the armature. And this, again, the other pieces were all very much about surface. I was very inspired by Jackie Windsor's work, how it was what it was from the inside all the way out, and wanted to not deal with just the surface of the piece, but to look with inside. And a lot of my friends were becoming pregnant at the time, so I was thinking about the mysteries of the body, and also had a mare who was pregnant at that time. So they became almost like X-ray drawings. The work is very much about drawing, I believe. And then I got a Guggenheim grant and an offer to go to the Israel Museum to build work and live there for a month. Excuse me. So what I did is drive around and collect debris from many of the wars and things, and built this work in the Billy Rose Sculpture Garden. It was so exhausting, but amazing. This was Jacob's Ladder. There were Arab construction workers building a new building, and they had these ladders that I'd never seen before. They're wider at the bottom, and they're narrow at the top, so they look like they're taller than they are. But they would bring me coffee and pieces of metal every day. And this is Avi, my assistant, and I welding out in the sculpture garden. We had a lot of tourists giving us a lot of advice. And this is this piece. It's 2 layers of really delicate steel gauze with even more fragile rusted metal. And I thought of it as a map of the world that's just pieced together and is just so incredibly fragile and yet somehow conserved as it is. It was wishful thinking. And this is my war horse. Around Israel, there were blown up tanks and troop carriers that they keep Rust-Oleumed by the side of the road as memories of wars and battles. And so this is the first one that I have to say is kind of a dead horse. It's at the Contemporary Museum in Chicago. And then in 1980, 82, I had a show that traveled to about 12 museums. It started, the Hanson Fuller Gallery got it going, and this was its incarnation at the Walker Art Center. There was a beautiful white terrazzo floor, so the pieces looked like they were just on an ice pond floating. This one was from the wrecked Catholic school, Rosary School, and so its name is Rosary, and it was the heating system that was crushed and covered with this pink brick dust. And I just thought it was a very Catholic-looking horse. But that's in the collection of the Walker. And then, there's so many horses, I'm only giving you a few from each year. This is 1986, we were invited to go to Hawaii. Thurston and Lila Twigg-Smith, he had started a little gallery at the Honolulu Advertiser newspaper's ground floor, a beautiful contemporary space, because there was no contemporary space in Honolulu. And he said, you know, I could ship your work from Montana, but it's cheaper to ship you and John, and you can stay in my home for 3 months on the Big Island. And we did, and it changed our lives. So the other thing that was really important for me is that I hadn't done much colored work because it takes such a long time to collect enough colored metal. But in Hawaii, all the roofs are colored steel, so I had an abundant supply. So I built 5 pieces there in a month with an assistant I borrowed from the Volcano Art Center. This is Maluhia, and this is Uha Ula Ula. And it was of my mare who was, she'd had 2 foals with me, and she always had them at like 10 after 1 or something, and I was like 10 minutes late, and she was sort of looking at me with this baby coming out, looking at her watch like, you know, you're late. But having just had a baby myself, it was adulation for her, how graceful she was and how well she handled it. I was in awe. And then this was the volcano fountaining at 1,600 feet in Hawaii. And we went out into the night. There was a full moon in the volcano, and there was this horse standing there. And Twig Smith had said to us, you know, John said, I'll give you my life's work for some land here. So he said, I'll trade you art. I have to see if one of my daughters wants to buy this land first. She has first right. And I said to John, we're going to get the land because, you know, Pele has presented herself to us. And he called the next morning and said she doesn't want it. So we were able to get 4 acres of coffee land in Kona and build our own house and studio there. And then I came back from there in '86 and had been collecting enough steel to make this piece. It was my first show in New York with Ed Thorpe Gallery. And this is after the coat of many colors, and Chief Joseph and the Appaloosa horses. His name is Joseph. And this just shows, I think you'll see in my newer work, this is how I work. There's just stuff all over the floor. And then I clean it all up, and there's this horse that's very formal. But there is this relationship between the figure and the ground, and stuff leaps up onto the horse and sometimes gets cut off or torn off, ground off. And so I'm more and more interested in the environment around the piece. As their legs get longer, sometimes there's not enough going on around the ground. This is Riot. I think this is the one that's in Delaware. This was old signage, and it made me think of horse brands, and also the dressage arena has letters at which you do certain movements. And we also refer to a trained horse as a schoolmaster. So I loved both the formal composition of the letters, but the context. And this is a piece that I was able to keep named Palma, because it reminded me of Picasso, and the mouth was it's sort of screaming like in Guernica, which you can't see. But it was very female, and my husband's mother is named Palma, so it was a kind of a contraction of Paloma. I really wanted to see how much I could make things feel like a horse, but have it still be so abstract. And I think at this point, the steel, it was just wonderful, kind of a wonderful dialogue between cutting and welding and adding and subtracting. This is Ikazuki, who was a famous samurai legend. And this was old, like a 34 Chevy or something that we dug up in a dump in Gallatin Gateway. And I loved the holes in it. It reminded me of samurai armor. And this is my first bronze piece. It's at the Walker Art Center. Martin Friedman called and said, we need a piece for outdoors. We're building a sculpture garden. And I said, well, my work can't go outside. And he said, well, find a way. And I met him for dinner, and he had Jim dine with him. It was in Cody, Wyoming. And Jim was telling me about this man, Mark Anderson, at the Walla Walla Foundry that was starting a casting facility. And so Mark came out, I had a brand new baby, Wilder, and looked at my slides and said, I think you should just drive a truckload of sticks to Walla Walla, we'll cast them in bronze, and then you weld a horse out of it. And that's how it began. And it was really the most fun I think I've ever had. And this is my old studio in Hawaii, which really is just a roof. And we'd send bronze sticks over to Hawaii, and Mark and I would weld an armature, and then this is passion fruit vines that I'm wrapping around it, and then I'd have to ship it back to Walla Walla in a container where they would take things apart and cast them. My clickers. And this is a piece, it's actually at the Kansas City Zoo, but this shows the piece in bronze. Then this was a commission for the Denver Art Museum. They wanted 3 horses, but they wanted one that kids could climb on. And a friend from Germany had given me, Daniela Grunke, her dad was a major sponsor of Ed Kienholz, or loved his work and sponsored him. And she gave me her young rider horse from Berlin. And this horse would love to, he would lay like this and the cat would curl up with him, and he loved you to sit with him and curl up. And when I was at a show, I'd give him like 12 carrots, and then he would do really well. If I didn't feed the meter, not so good. But I thought he was the perfect horse to make it so that the children could climb on it, because he would have liked it. This was my other mare, PJ, but this is Argus, the cowherd, like the myth with all the eyes. And so this is birch and aspen. And this is Second Daughter. This is a piece called Walla Walla, and this right hind leg is the bougainvillea vine from Bob Arneson's back porch. And I was like the witch in Hansel and Gretel. Every time I go by that vine, I'd pinch it and wish it die, you know. And finally it worked, and they brought it up to the foundry for me. So it's one of the foundation legs of this horse and of my work. Bob was a fantastic teacher. He was really kind of mean. He loved to be the devil's advocate. Not mean, he was just hard ass. But you would be there, he'd work at night, because he lived in Davis, most everybody commuted, and you'd be watching him or helping him mix clay, watch him build stuff in the studio, watch him fire it many times, glaze, underglaze, overglaze, lusters, and then watch him photograph it, help him put it in a crate, help him drive it down to the gallery in San Francisco, go to the opening, and then read a review. I mean, it was just, I don't know, it was just an amazing point in time where you were able to experience that. This was from Manzanita. It was a commission in California, and I never got to work with that kind of wood before, so it was thrilling. And this is my palette. This is my green. And this is my steel studio. Oh, this is the good stuff. Anyway, you can see here how I'll make that shape of the body. I actually lay it out on the floor, whether it's sticks or steel or bronze sticks. I make this horse body and lay it on the floor, weld it together. We hold it up on the crane as high as it should be, and I might make adjustments. And then we weld pieces for the front legs and then for the hind legs, and then weld the legs on. So it's always stable and able to stand up by itself. But then I work with it like this. It's really more like an abstract painting, adding and subtracting until I sort of know who the horse is. And then I add the neck and the head and the tail to personify it. But before that, it's really about what's inside of it. This is a concrete. I love stuff. I love different kinds of metal. I am fascinated by how matter hangs together. I love how lead is soft and droopy and like butter, and copper bends so easily and is wonderful and difficult to weld, but then it will break. And steel you can bend forever. And then cast bronze, we manipulate the sticks quite a bit, and you can bend them, but at a certain point they're kind of crystallized because they're cast, and then they break. But I love the individual mass, the weight, the volume of handling pieces of steel is so different than handling bronze or copper. And there's just something about that weight and balance that I particularly enjoy. This is what I did with myself on 9/11. I didn't know how to process this whole thing, and so I went in the studio called White Crane. And this is Boogie Woogie. And this was Turning Its Head, one of my favorite pieces. And this is Hawaii, the Big Island, which is from the same, I made at the same time I made Monacana. It's ohia wood from the mountainside on the Big Island. Ohia is a hardwood that's really the most prolific tree on the Big Island. The flower from it is called lehua, and where I live, the yellow lehua is common, which is just in this one strip, about a mile wide, and so it's a sacred hula flower. So for me, I feel like I've almost moved on from being a horse worshiper to being a tree worshiper. These trees are like truffula trees from Dr. Seuss. They're covered with these insane flowers. But when they die, they're so beautiful. And we bought our land. We have 100 acres at 3,400 feet because of all the dead trees. But again, here, I named it Hawaii because I thought of it as an island, a geological formation. But you can see the reclining nude. You can see how the weight is on her right shoulder and her right hip. And also the work doesn't move. They're not rearing or running, but I feel like I want you to be able to internalize the weight and the feeling in your body and kind of anticipate what the motion might be next. So it's almost like putting on a mask or something where you participate. And here's Monacana, which means Montana in Hawaiian. I gathered all this wood in Hawaii and had to pressure wash it and brush it and clean it to get it through the ag inspections and send it to Walla Walla, where I built these 3 pieces, 2 of which I kept. So I think it's telling you that this is my favorite work. This is my 2 Grand Prix mares. They're long dead now, but Vicky and Isabel. And this is Isabel from the same wood. She's visiting China at the embassy. Max Baucus is our ambassador to China and our former Montana senator. And I'm just showing you some horses now that were my models throughout the past 30 years. This is Hoover, who is my Tang Dynasty horse. This is at the Margulies collection in Florida. This was Rex, he's very old here, who was we had the therapeutic riding program at my barn, and he was the therapeutic horse of the year for the Northwest and second for the whole country. We were on CBS Sunday morning. We had a cart with a wheelchair that you could drive a wheelchair into, and he was a magnificent 3rd level dressage horse and therapy horse. This is Rex. This is Ismani, my first warm blood. This was Wilfred, Willie. This is Captain. He's still alive. He's very old. He's a cow horse. I mainly have dressage horses, but I like to have one cow horse that I can get on and go help people herd cows. This is Danuta. She's like 17.3. That was when she was young. And this is Danuta, that was at LA Louvre. And actually they're down in Louisville now, she and her partner. This is Spotty, who was very young there. He just won the Intermediate 1 championship in the Northwest. He's in dressage. He's like a lipizan with spots. And these are galls in the cottonwood tree, so I use those as the spots. And this is my new mare, Dancia. And this is her. And this is my son, Hunter, with Indelible, which is going to go to a children's hospital in Iowa City. This was at Zola Lieberman Gallery. There were these columns in the old gallery that I have fought with for 20-some years. It's just so giant. And so we just put this one piece in this space that was probably 40 by 40. And it weighed 4,000 pounds. But you can see the columns turn to saplings. My clicker is a little stubborn. Did I skip one? No. This is next to my studio in Walla Walla. The foundry built me a studio that I leased from them, and part of the thing was that there is this greenhouse that was there from the 60s that we took out all the tables and repurposed it. Because my materials get covered with snow, and it's actually really hard for me to work in Montana in the winter. So everything's covered with snow, and then even the mountains I can't get up on the roads. And so every time I go to the foundry, I drive a load of sticks from Montana. And this has actually become too small, but it's 90 by 120. I'm a greedy person. It shows me working. The problem with the greenhouse is it's very nice now, but it can be like 130 in there in the summer. But, I steel myself and go in and drag the sticks in. But I do love working in there. And sometimes deer will go in there. Like there were 4 deer in there a few weeks ago. This shows the ceramic shell, and they're getting ready to cast this. I just wanted to show you a few shots of the foundry and how this works. So they'll coat the wood with ceramic shell and then burn it out and vacuum the ash or pressure wash the ash out. And then they'll sprue it up and then make a plaster mold. And I think that's what this is. It's all got wax sprues. They'll swish the wax in the burnt out ceramic shell and core it, and then they'll put a traditional plaster mold around that so that, and then they'll burn out the wax. So it's first lost stick, and then it's lost wax. And the ceramic shell, the foundry pretty much designed this just for me. The ceramic shell gives you the beautiful texture of the wood, but it's not really strong enough for the size of things we're trying to pour into. So when they get that out, then they back it up with a plaster, so then they have the strength and the beautiful texture. So it's like a twice-baked potato, and it costs a lot to do that, but they found that when they toted up the numbers, it was actually cheaper because they were spending less time tooling and in the welding shop, and it looked fresher, so there was a better outcome as well. This is Mark Anderson. They're getting ready to pour here. And this shows the bronze going into the mold. 2,300 degrees. And this is this is a piece, pine forest, I think, or I don't know which one. But these are pieces of bronze that are getting ready to be welded onto a horse. So you can see what it looks like raw. Okay, so I got there, and there's this piece, and I couldn't live with it. I'm like, I hate the way the neck is too long, the head is attached wrong. So we cut the head off. Do you see it hanging there on my crane? And I was able to, boy, that's hard to see, isn't it? Well, there's the head. There is a better view. So I was able to weld it back on. And this shows how I put the color on with a weed burner and 2 types of acid, ferric nitrate and sulfurated potash, liver of sulfur. And it's rough to do in the summer because you really get a lot of reflected heat. But the acids turn colors at different temperatures, and then I use white paint to build up an opaque layer so that the ferric nitrate turns kind of a red, different shades of red and orange. So this is the journey of this horse. This is in New York at the first gallery I showed with of Danesi Gallery on the 6th floor in Soho, or Chelsea, sorry. These are the riggers that do Richard Serra. And comes another. But look at that. I love this, that he's actually comforting the horse. So this was just a random shot. This is the Ascension. Come on. Oops. Okay. Yeah, the clicker is being a little sticky, forgive me. I started doing these pieces out of bronze, referring back to the mud pieces with the things leaning on them. I don't know, maybe because I'm blind or whatever, that the older I get, the bigger the work is getting, the taller they are, and then there's all of this space underneath them that needs to be activated. So I just started leaving some of the stuff around that I was working with, and I don't know, I think this is Fish Trap. It's really one of my favorite pieces. And this is a piece, Millie, out of a fire that was really near our house, which you'll see more of later. We had to evacuate, and this is from LA Louvre, Kimberly, Looking Glass. Thank you. I think this was Paula Englum Gallery. And this was Storm Castle. This was at LA Louvre, and then now Greg Kucera has it. This is also one of my favorite pieces. It's just, when I'm in the woods, there's just, you just see these compositions, and then, like one time my horse and I in Davis were riding along a road, and we both saw a wild boar in the ditch. And I nearly spooked off of her, but she went almost to her knees and was shaking, and her heart was pounding. And then we got it together, and it was a log. It was a hollow log with some branches on it. And we were both so mortified and shamed that we kind of, staggered down the road. But I kind of, and horses see, they look at the silhouette. They can tell, if a mare is in heat by their silhouette. They can tell if they're angry. There's so many, the ears, the face, they can see so much by the silhouette. And I think I'm the same way. I start in the same way as a horse, and I see forms like that in the woods. But so anyway, I guess the work is in a way getting more literal. This is now Hawaii. This is a piece Mark Anderson and John went down, risked their lives on this beach on the North Shore at the birthplace of Kamehameha, and this is the name of this piece. Thurston Twigg Smith gave me this old canoe eaten with termites, an ancient Hawaiian canoe part, and that's in there. And anyway, I love working there in the winter because, for one thing, nature is so different. Ferns and things, they just think of, plants have such exotic opportunities there. In Montana, plants have to be very careful. And in Hawaii, they can do silly and frivolous things. This is where we live. This is a view from our house. This is Hualalai Volcano. It looks more like Africa than what you think of Hawaii. And these are ohia trees here in the foreground. And these are my compatriots. We had 3 wild horses and 2 wild donkeys. The horses have passed away. They must have been 40. I think the donkeys are at least 40. But these are ohia and koa trees. And this is where I think I'm becoming a realist. And this is the elders, the hapu ferns. And this is my studio there. And my assistant. And this is my husband John helping me. And this is a koa tree. And this is a fallen tree, which reminds me of my first work with the mud and sticks. But you can see how the pattern and the geometry is just so exciting and different. This is from the ohia roots, and this is the trees die in such a beautiful way, and you think they're dead, and then these little sprigs of flowers and leaves will come out. And so this is what I'm trying to find in the work. A small piece with the litter underneath it. And aloha. And then Iceland. I've gone over there for a couple of months the last 3 years, working at a fellow sculptor's horse farm. She has these beautiful horses and invited us to use her studio and stay with her. So we were there for a month not this summer, but the one before, and we'll go again next year. And we're not very good tourists, so when we go somewhere, it's really wonderful. This is Snæfellsnes. Look at the point of that volcano up there on the right. This is where I collected a lot of material on this beach. There are not any pieces, hardly any wood in Iceland, so I started using marine debris, plastic and flotsam and jetsam. And you can see how tiny these horses are. My leg is hanging down, and I always made fun of them. I thought they looked like My Little Pony. Well, I was mistaken. They are lion horses. I've never had more fun in my life, and they're so brave. Partly they're brave because they have no predators on Iceland. My horses, we actually have wolves and bears and mountain lions, and there are many things to be afraid of in Montana. Isn't that amazing? And then our friends took us to their friend's house. They have an eider duck farm. It's been 3 generations. And so they have a peninsula that they've fenced off so that foxes and dogs can't get to it. And the ducks just return on their own. And they make little nesting boxes for them. And some of them they have these little holes. And it's bleak and windy and cold. But it's a beneficial relationship for both. The ducks, I think, sit for 3 weeks or something, and a few days before they're going to hatch, they have little colored flags around each nest. And literally, you could pet this duck because they're so broody, they just sit there and won't move. So they have little flags about when they started nesting. And about 3 or 4 days before they're going to hatch, because the ducks pluck their down off of their chest to line the nest. So the farmer goes in and plucks it's a dirty, smelly mess because they eat fish, you can imagine. They pluck the eider down out and replace it with straw or hay. And since they leave the nest immediately, it works fine for everybody. And eider down, like a pillow, is like, I don't know, $4,000. They use it to line astronaut vests and fighter pilot vests. It's the one thing in the world that doesn't crush, and it's just the lightest thing. But anyway, this was a great source. This is Hunter's girlfriend, Emma. This is where one of the few places the wood comes in from Russia and Norway and washes up. This is on the very northern tip of Iceland. And so this is where I got a lot of great stuff. And this is an Icelandic sheepdog, but behind him are some old eider duck boxes that I ended up using in this piece called Hraun. You can see the blue hip is part of this shaped box. So I made that in Iceland, and I made a piece for our hostess, and her cat was in love with it. And this is my trip home. The piece that I made at home. And this one was at Anglum Gilbert Gallery in a show we had of work done at this woman's studio in Iceland, Thorda Sigridardóttir. And this is bronze, actually. And then this is a trip to Cody for the most recent work I've been doing. This kind of situation kind of gives me a heart attack. I really have to deep breathe and try to be calm because there's so much wood. This is the big one. And this is a piece, Pine Forest, I guess. It's at Great Kusera right now. Powder. So that was pine, different kinds of pine, I think white bark pine, and then this is the roots of these trees that were in a reservoir that was a valley that was flooded to make a reservoir, so they're very old and worn. And this is from Hawaii, it's an ohia piece. And then I got this chance, I read in the newspaper that the Gulf of Alaska Keepers, this volunteer group, had organized all these trips to Prince William Sound, to various islands along Alaska, because so much debris had washed ashore from the tsunami in Japan. And some weird thing happened. They brought it down. I mean, they would go out on little float boats and collect pieces of styrofoam a half an inch wide, because they'd find all these birds' bodies that the skeletons were just there filled with plastic debris. And this happens all over the world. It doesn't need to be. It happens in Iceland. It happens everywhere. But anyway, they brought the material down to Seattle, and they were going to have volunteers sort through it and recycle it. Something went wrong. It was at Waste Management. Something with the city, some political thing, they weren't allowed to do it. They made them put it in the landfill. And the guys at Waste Management snuck me in. I had to get in this dumpster. It was like 130 degrees with a tarp over it. And my assistant from the foundry and I got this stuff out of there. I rented a U-Haul and drove it to the foundry. Do you see this giant fish float? But do you see this little tree? It's like, oh. There is hope. Anyway, and then the other guy, I didn't know I had a close-up. So then I built this piece. This is the armature. It's bronze, wood, and rock that I, patinaed, and then put this plastic on it. And this piece is at Kusera right now. The Three Sorrows, earthquake, tsunami, meltdown, from Gretel Ehrlich's book, Facing the Wave, which is a most beautiful, poetic thing. She just jumped on a plane after the event and went over there, and it's just beautiful. But she wrote a small piece for the the catalog for the show. But anyway, I have so much of this debris. The waste management guy slipped me in, and it was like a grab bag. I got these big white plastic bags full of the stuff that I couldn't tell what was in there. And so I just kind of felt it and brought home what I thought would work. And I did get some great stuff. I have a lot of plastic bottles to recycle too. But I mean, some of the stuff was like crushed helmets and baby shoes and a lot of, Japanese bottles and things. And so I tried, there's a few helmets in here and one part of a shoe. I tried to keep it more abstract. I felt I didn't want to take advantage of the situation. And I asked Keiko Hara, a friend in Walla Walla, a painter, she taught there for many years. I said, is this okay? Is this appropriate? And she thought it was. And I said, do you think I should have a shrine on the wall or something? And she thought a long time and she said, no, this is the shrine. The horse is the shrine. And I think almost it reminds me of the piece in Jerusalem that's like the map of the world. It's almost like the blue plastic is the ocean, and the horse is, living beings on the earth. So anyway, this piece, I felt I wanted to make it as formal as I could, and it was thrilling to work with formally, but I think it's very evocative. And then we put a video on the wall of the gallery showing them collecting this stuff in Alaska, and you actually could recognize individual characters that are in the piece. This is in the gallery in Seattle. And it looks like it just washed in through the door, and eddied up in the corner. And this is a small piece from the same material that's in bronze. Hisaibo, which this man in Japan, what happened is after the nuclear event, everybody was evacuated, but the pets, the horses, the farm animals were stuck there with no food. Some horses were stuck in stalls. So these people, mostly old people, went in to feed them and care for them. And this man who owns racehorses rescued 200 horses and is taking care of them. So Hisaiba it means a misplaced horse, or a horse with no place to be. And so there's a rescue society to help take care of these animals. And then right before my last trip to Walla Walla, this is about 2.5 weeks ago, right before 8 inches of snow, this Millie fire came up behind us. It was 5 miles from my house for a month. We had to evacuate all the art, and I had 9 people's horses at my barn. We have a barn, and our studios are 1.5 miles away from our house, which is near this canyon. And so I went up and got this material, but it was wonderful because little trees are starting to come up. And I don't know, I'm kind of a person who, I'm ashamed of myself, but when there's a tornado or something, I'm just like, I love looking at the stuff. And so this forest fire was the same. I mean, there's just such beauty in tragedy as well. And these are the little trees coming up everywhere. And this is in the studio, so you can see the bronze armature, how I begin. And what's wonderful about having this studio in Walla Walla now is that I can start working with, I don't have to go too far with the bronze armature. I can start working with the wood material. We can cut away armature we don't need and replace it somewhere else where it will fit in with what I'm doing. So it's a real plastic process. But this show, so here we've painted the armature black so I could see what I was doing. But there you can see how abstract it really is. And then this is how I would like to see the piece finished. I think this is about it. Oh, and this is a giant piece that's going with indelible to Iowa City. And I'm working on the patina right now, but this shows Brianne, one of my assistants. It shows you how big it is. It's big. These two are going to be in Iowa City, and this shows them working on it in the metal shop. And that's Danuta. And Vicki Hearn is one of the people that I love. She was a poet and horse trainer, dog trainer, and just wanted to say some of the things she said. It seems so relevant right now. There is cruelty and ruthlessness, and above all, there are failures of imagination, unhappiness caused by someone's being unable to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. And there are people who describe training as a process of discussing with animals the attributes of God, a human discussion in which the human listens as much as she talks, which I think she's referring to Martin Buber and the I-thou relationship. Anyway, and then 20 years ago, I was here with my little boys. I was in a show at the White House. We were stranded in a blizzard here for 5 days. It was a memorable experience. Thank you. That was long, I'm sorry. Should we just go to the reception? Do we need questions?
Well, we'd be happy to go upstairs to the reception, and perhaps if you have questions, you can ask them up there. Thank you once again.